Hey guys, welcome to some kind of review for Homeworld Deserts of Kharak. Now, this game was actually pretty exciting because it was a new RTS, but it turns out it didn't quite live up to expectations, and I'll go through everything within this video. So what is Homeworld Deserts of Kharak? Well, it's a ground-based RTS set in the Homeworld universe, and it's sort of a prequel to the original game. So where the original game talked about finding an artifact in the desert, and this game is about finding that artifact. Now, I do have to say that this is one of the most atmospheric RTS games that I've ever played. Its art style, the cinematics, music, cinematography, voice acting, and there's a lot of voice acting, it's all very, very nicely done, and just it really does sort of suck you into the Homeworld universe, and it really does feel like a Homeworld game. Now, the story itself is actually an awesome story, but its execution is limited by its short campaign. Now, people have sort of reported that the campaign will only last you about 10 to 15 hours, and maybe a bit longer if you take your time, but if you have any experience in real-time strategies, then you're gonna be able to get through the campaign relatively easily. Now, one cool thing about the campaign is that there is unit persistence between missions, so your units can sort of level up with experience, and from mission to mission in the campaign, you get to bring over your last set of units. So this really does sort of encourage you to keep your units alive. There was one mission where I sort of carelessly let all my worker units die, and well, the next mission I started with only 2 of them. So it does sort of give you that sort of long-term goal in terms of building up your army, because it does have this sort of Oregon Trail sort of storyline where you're traveling from one point to another, heading towards this main sort of primary artifact, and you bring things along. But that's pretty much how the campaign works. Mission variety is okay, but a little lacking. I mean, because there's no base building in this game. Your main base is sort of this capital ship that's movable, but there's no base building, and that sort of limits the amount of missions that you can have. I mean, there's sort of timed missions, there's survive missions, there's capture the points and wipe out your enemy and stuff like that. There's sort of an okay amount of variety, but after a while there's only so much you can do. And also the pacing is a bit weird, so because it feels like the campaign's a little short, so the pacing does sort of speed up and slow down in weird spots, and it's not too bad, but it's okay. It could be better. And honestly, the missions themselves feel very tutorial-esque. Like, I did play the tutorial, right? And after the tutorial, I went to the first mission, and the first mission was pretty much what the tutorial just told me. And as you go through the missions, it's really just sort of just explain what's going on and how you're supposed to do things in a very tutorial-esque way. And that's kind of weird, because this is supposed to be, well, I was expecting a kind of hardcore RTS, and I was thinking this was going to be really, really tough, but well, turns out it's quite straightforward, and it is very handholdy in that sense. Now, gameplay is sort of, I would say it's very minimal sort of gameplay, but it's very refined. Now, the tech tree is a very basic tech tree. You just sort of have this list of options to upgrade on the top right corner of the screen when you select your capital ship. And there aren't that many units, but there is very good control of the units that you have, and the terrain positioning is very good. The usage of light units attack heavy units, and it's all sort of adds up to this very skill-based gameplay, and that is very, very good. So there's no base building. You have this mobile base, but your capital ship does have this sort of extra layer behind it where you have this power allocation, where you can get extra power to boost up your capital ship's weapons or range or repair or shields and stuff like that. And of course, when you add on more power, it sort of heats up the capital ship so it can actually overheat. So that's really cool. There's no mini-map, which sort of took me by surprise at the start, but as a ground-based RTS. But pressing spacebar brings you to the tactical view, and this tactical view sort of it's sort of this active aggression sort of tactical view. I'm just relating to that because that's the last sort of RTS I played, and in active aggression it sort of felt not as useful and not as fluid. But in Homeworld Shipbreakers, I was going to call it Shipbreakers, that was its original title. In Homeworld Deserts of Kharak, the tactical view really does feel very, very useful because you can control everything very easily, just as you would in the zoomed in view. And actually, I could play through equally on the tactical view and on the main view. Now, one main mechanic of Deserts of Kharak is, as I mentioned before, its original title Shipbreakers, which I honestly think was a better name because Shipbreakers sounds really cool, and it's sort of this big feature of the game. Now, the resources you collect in the game, there's 2 resources, and you get it from shipbreaking, and that means you find these sort of crashed, abandoned ships where you go over to them and you blow them up and all these resources fall out, and then you pick it up. You're basically scavengers, and that's a really interesting take on resource collection and resource management. And of course, when you break open some of these old ships, you often get artifacts which will give you sort of permanent upgrades to your units and stuff like that. And these capturing of artifacts is a big theme behind this game, as the main objective of the game in the campaign mode is to find the primary artifact. And along the way you capture all these mini artifacts, and also in skirmish modes you have certain win conditions, and it can be capturing a certain number of artifacts as one of the win conditions. Now, in terms of your units moving around, as I mentioned, the control is very good, and one thing that's really sort of tactical and strategy based is when you're telling your units to move somewhere, it'll show their movement path, and also when they're attacking something, it'll show their line of sight. So a solid red line means they can shoot this thing, a dotted red line means their line of sight is blocked by something, but they can still sort of target it ish sort of thing. It depends if there's hills or cliffs and sand dunes in the way. Now, this line of sight mechanic plays in very well with the way they sort of constructed their maps. It's not a tile-based map. It's sort of smooth gradients of hills and cliffs and stuff like that. And that gives the maps very sort of fluid feelings to them. And also the line of sight comes into play when it comes to certain abilities, because for example the tanks you're controlling throughout the campaign and have this sort of smoke screen, and deploying the smoke screen will actually break line of sight. So if for example you're being attacked by some long-range railguns and you don't have anything to counter that, well, you can just use the smoke screens to block their line of sight and they won't be able to shoot you for a while, and that's really cool. And there's a lot of other really cool abilities for other units, like the light vehicles can have the speed boost, and there's also sort of EMP sort of disabling abilities and AoE effects, and all sort of very active effects along with a couple passive effects, and that adds up more to the skill-based gameplay, which is crucial in something like this. And of course, like in Active Aggression, in this game you have aircraft that can be launched from your main capital ship, and there's the sort of interceptor crafts and bombers, and they behave similarly, and they're deployed to, you don't really control them, you deploy them to an area and they will sort of auto attack things that get into that area, and so that adds another layer of strategy to it, so that's cool. And overall, it's surprisingly easy and intuitive to control. I mean, when I first picked up the game, I thought, okay, this is going to be a hardcore RTS. And out of the many RTS games that I've played so far, this one felt the easiest to pick up. It's just sort of controlling the units, telling them where to go, and hotkeying them, and controlling the different groups, and all of that stuff. It was surprisingly easy and intuitive. You don't actually need to go through a tutorial to understand it. I mean, the visual communication and the feedback you receive from what it shows on screen, especially when you're telling units to move and stuff like that, an attack move especially, it will even show you a grid that shows the terrain, so it's easy to identify where the high ground is and the low ground is. That's one of the best implementations of visual communication in terms of terrain and positioning in a strategy game that I've seen so far, especially a real-time strategy. So this gives you this rewarding feeling for micromanagement, because there really isn't that a lot of macro in this game. I mean, there's a couple of resources and you sort of mine them out and you build a bunch of units. So upgrades are sort of all on one screen because there's only one building technically, which is your capital ship. So there's only one building. There's no building of more buildings. So it's all on the micro. And as far as I can tell, that feels really rewarding. Now, speaking of controls, one super surprising, and I don't know why, what went wrong or why this is not in, but out of all the hotkeys that you're allowed to use, none of them are rebindable. So there's no rebindable hotkeys, and I don't understand why that is the case, because as far as I'm aware, adding in rebindable hotkeys is not that difficult. I mean, I've been playing a lot of Rocket League. Rocket League has rebindable keys on a console. You can rebind the keys on Rocket League I've been playing it on the PlayStation 4, and you can do it there. But you can't rebind keys in this, what's supposed to be a hardcore RTS, which I don't understand why. Now, another downside is the AI in the game. Now, everyone is talking about this one, and they're basically calling it the dumbest AI they've ever encountered. I mean, I'm sure there's been dumber AIs in the past, but for a modern game that's supposed to be a really good RTS with the Homeworld title behind it, the AI apparently is really, really bad and makes terrible decisions even on the highest difficulty. Like, I went to the campaign and you got 3 difficulty levels, and you'll notice this immediately by this 3-star achievement system, basically. And whenever there's a 3-star system and these special side goals sort of thing, you already start to question how long the campaign is and how much content there is. But I went to classic difficulty, which is supposed to be the hardest, and I never lost a campaign mission. I mean, I didn't even come close. I mean, even when I became really reckless and just started throwing my units out there, I never lost. And in skirmish mode, it's even worse. And because in the campaign mode, it's sort of compensated by special events and reinforcements coming in. So the AI, the bad AI, is not too noticeable on the campaign, but in skirmish mode, it's definitely, well, the term dumb as bricks has been used a lot, and I've been reading that term quite a bit in terms of the AI in Deserts of Kharak. And besides that, in terms of replayability and content, it is a very small map pool. There's only a handful of maps right now, and that really does limit what you can do in skirmish and multiplayer. And even with the factions, there's only 2 factions and there's little variation between it. It's not like, it's like RTSs where the factions are, well, there's some key differences. Like, for example, the Galcian forces, they produce units in a slightly different way with a mobile production facility. But besides that, there's not really any too big a difference. And in terms of performance, I'm just going to throw this in there as a bonus negative point. The load times are surprisingly long. I mean, they're not excessively long, but you could be waiting. I mean, I'm using a pretty decent rig, and I'm waiting a good 30 seconds to a minute to load up one of the campaign missions or a skirmish map, and that seems a bit long. I mean, some of the loading times I'm sure have gone up to 2 minutes, and they're really, I don't see what's taking so long to load. Maybe it's the textures or the graphics or something like that, because the game does actually look very, very good. Zooming in, the texture quality is very nice. But my main point is that all of this limitations in the amount of content and the dumb AI leads to a severe lacking of replayability, because you can't really, there's no choices or there's no meaningful choices in the campaign, and skirmish mode is against the AI is completely pointless. So and with the small map pool, it means the multiplayer scene is also lacking in terms of game modes as well. So that leads to a lacking in the competitive scene, and it's obvious that they wanted this to be a competitive game because there are ranks. There's Silver League, Gold League, all of that stuff, and leaderboards even. They wanted this to be a competitive game, but there's nothing to really be competitive about because the replayability is so limited. And this in turn leads to a small multiplayer community. That means just browsing online, I'll show you some footage of me looking at the scene online. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's times I log on and I click on global to see how many people are hanging around in the chat room, and there's like 20 people there. There's one game being listed. There is an auto matchmaking feature, but I question how many people are actually playing those, because looking at the leaderboards, I mean, after the game being out for a week, the people are still sort of hanging around in Silver League and not really climbing. There's a couple people, of course, who are out there to win it, but there really isn't a big multiplayer scene, and it's smaller even than Active Aggression. And Active Aggression was criticized for a multiplayer scene that gradually died off. And this one starts out even weaker, and I see the multiplayer scene not going very long. And all of this means that the game, I predict, will have a very short lifespan, which really makes it not worth the price tag, because it's not a cheap game, it's a pretty expensive game. And because there's not much you can do there, the campaign alone is not worth the price tag. So, considering the multiple name changes, if I haven't mentioned this before, that the game went through a few name changes, and the Homeworld picked it up, and then there was this sudden release announcement. In the middle of December, the game said, okay, we're releasing in January. So it was a very surprised announcement. It feels like it was rushed out for the new year for no real reason. And no one was expecting it until at least later on in the year, maybe June or towards the end of 2016, and many would have been fine with the 2017 release. But based on this, I have to assume something didn't go according to plan. Either money ran out or management made some weird decisions, which at this point I don't think any of us are unfamiliar with. So my conclusion for Homeworld Deserts of Kharak is that I think if you're not too big of a fan, like you're not absolutely obsessed with Homeworld, well, wait for a sale and maybe buy it at half price for the campaign if you're a Homeworld fan. And or maybe wait until they flesh out the game. Maybe there'll be an expansion or some free DLC, maybe, we could hope. And if they do flesh out the game with some sort of expansion, then they might be able to save it, but unfortunately it might be too late by then, and the community for Deserts of Kharak would probably have moved on. So, in the end, it feels like active aggression all over again. So much potential, but just not quite there. If only. Oh well. Anyway, that wraps up some kind of review for Deserts of Kharak, Homeworld Deserts of Kharak, that is. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you found it useful, hope you found it interesting. If you did, let me know in the comments down below, leave a like. If you didn't, well, there's a dislike button for that. And yeah, that wraps it up. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Hostile light attack vehicle detected.
Be advised, carrier repair systems online.
Light attack vehicle is under fire. Strike craft. Galaxian ranged forces are protecting the